since the Richmond Chamber of Commerce organised the Access to Finance debate in the borough. It was tough for many businesses at the time, and at the heart of the debate was entrepreneurship. What do you believe entrepreneurship needs to thrive?
Well, I certainly want entrepreneurs to thrive. It's a key part of my mandate. I'm responsible, amongst other things, in government for business as well as universities, skills and science. And entrepreneurship, which is private enterprise, risk-taking, profitable business, are things that are absolutely fundamental to economic recovery. So I'm absolutely there. I've not been an entrepreneur myself. I've been in the private sector. But what I have got is I've got a team of advisors, about 15, 16, actually mostly women as it happens, who are very successful British entrepreneurs, and I seek advice from them, and I work very closely with the business groups on how best we can encourage it.
What's the government's policy on entrepreneurship?
Well, our policy is to encourage startups, to encourage the private sector to grow. Growth is going to come in future through the private sector rather than through public spending, or for that matter, private consumption. It's got to come through the private sector and people taking risks, being willing to launch businesses. There is already a lot of evidence that this is happening. We've got, I think, the most rapid startup rate in our history. We've got 4 million or so businesses. Now, of course, large numbers of those are self-employed people trying their hand at business, wanting to grow, and that's something the government is 100% behind.
What's the government's policy on and relationship with startups and small and medium-sized businesses?
I think we need to make a distinction between different types of small companies because they all tend to be lumped together in the sort of public discourse. Obviously self-employed people are in a different position from small companies who've taken on staff. Taking on staff is a big step. Medium-sized companies, by which I mean 50-plus employees, multi-million pound turnover, what the Germans call the Mittelstand. It's the growing medium-sized companies that are really the backbone of the economy. And if we're going to recover, it's those companies that have got to take this big quantum leap forward, particularly international markets, and that's what will make the recovery really happen.
How is the government supporting, developing and stimulating startups and small and medium-sized businesses?
Well, I think there's a whole series of things have to happen. Some of the things are about government getting out of the way and deregulating, and we have a process in government which we call the Red Tape Challenge, and another system called 1 in, 2 out. Tax needs to be attractive. We can't have penal rates of tax, and the government's moved some way along that road, given the difficulties of the public finances, but we've nonetheless cut corporation tax systematically and tried to cut other taxes where we can, notably by giving some relief on business rate. I think there are positive things too. We do recognise that when companies are making a big jump in terms of their business plan, if, for example, it's a sort of middle-sized company that's been serving the British market but wants to become an exporter, they are going to need help and advice. And we try to provide that through our mentoring schemes, notably the so-called Accelerator, through UKTI that supports businesses in export markets. And we also recognise that for companies to succeed, they need trained staff. There's no advantage in this country being a source of cheap labour. There are other countries can do that better. What we've got to have are highly qualified, highly skilled people, so we're trying to boost apprenticeships. Training was devalued in the past. People with good vocational qualifications were not respected. We're trying to change that and build up both the quantity and the quality of apprenticeships and target them particularly at growing small, medium-sized companies.
Could you explain the initiative behind the government's startup loans?
Yes, the starting point is, of course, that companies find it very difficult these days to get money from banks. Banks have become much more conservative as a result of the crisis. We are encouraging new types of finance like peer-to-peer lending, but again, a lot of people find that difficult to get access to. So for companies that are starting, we have got a new scheme which we call a startup loan scheme, up to £10,000, a modest loan for companies with a good business plan. It's not been run by bureaucrats. It's not a political thing. It's effectively managed on our behalf by James Kahn, who you'll know from the Dragon's Den, and he vets the various organisations which manage this scheme. It's been operating now for over a year. There's an enormous demand, which demonstrates to us the extent to which there is a pent-up demand for people to start companies. Many of the people applying are from ethnic minorities. Actually, I think a majority, or certainly a large minority, are women. There is groups of people who in the past have found it very difficult to start business, who we are able now to help through the Startup Loan Scheme.
Given the business and economic climate of recent times, how important is an organisation like the Richmond Chamber of Commerce in advising and supporting small and medium-sized businesses to succeed? Is this a new role?
Well, we start from a very strong position, and in Twickenham, Richmond, this is not Hartlepool or Hull. This is not an area with a long tradition of industrial decline. It's a very entrepreneurial part of London. We also have a bedrock of extremely good companies already here. You have, for example, in the media sector, you have Haymarket in Twickenham. Sky, which is just up the road in Osterley, is expanding its campus from I think 12,000 at the moment to 20,000. There's enormous demand for highly creative people in the media. And in the public sector, you've got the National Physical Laboratory, which is something I'm responsible for ultimately as a minister, which is expanding. We've been encouraged to expand, and they've got a demand for scientists with high levels of skill. So we start from a very, very strong base, and it's the kind of place where people want to live if they are business people. So that's a positive. But nonetheless, I do meet a lot of companies who are struggling a bit. They're trying to get off the ground. We've been through a terrible recession. They do need advice. They do need moral support. I think being an entrepreneur is pretty lonely, actually. And that's where the Chamber can come in handy by giving advice, encouragement, networking.
The Richmond Chamber of Commerce is now connected to over 4,000 businesses in the borough. What's your view of the role that the Chamber plays in the development of local businesses?
No, I think that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, I know a lot of it depends on Anne's work and some of the key people around her. And if you have a really dynamic chamber, which fortunately we do in this borough, it helps enormously. I think if it was summarised in one word, it is the networking. It's the ability of people to make contacts, and through contacts, friendships, source of advice, and indeed people doing business with each other. You know, business to business is one of the main dynamics locally.
There are currently 3 high-profile topics at a national level that will impact the local community. What's your personal message to the local community on the subject of Heathrow, immigration, and city regulation?
Well, they're all difficult, sometimes highly emotional subjects. I try to be balanced in the Heathrow debate. And on the one hand, local residents, genuinely and rightly are concerned about aircraft noise. It really does affect the quality of life, particularly for people under the flight path. I think it's quite unreasonable to expect growing pressure on residents from that environmental source. On the other hand, if you've got a business community, they do need connectivity, they need to get to different parts of the world. As government, we're trying to encourage exporting, so we want people to go to provincial Chinese cities and have more connections like that. I think if you're just asking a personal opinion, I think we are going to have to have more airport capacity. I would concentrate on provincial airports because I think we need to make sure the economy is better balanced. There has to be more capacity in the southeast. I think probably Gatwick is the least worst of the various options. On city regulation, if I built a reputation at all nationally, it was warning people about some of the dangers in the financial system going back 10, 15 years. So I've always argued that to have a stable banking system is absolutely fundamental. We had extremely reckless lending, did enormous damage in the last 5 years. So it's got to be properly regulated, but it is an important industry. And, you need efficient banks. You need good insurers. It's an important export industry. It's linked to our professional services. So getting a balance is important. And I think in government we're doing that. We've taken measures to split up the banks, the retail and so-called casino operations. That's gone through Parliament. I'm in the process of setting up new banks which have a specific business lending function. We're providing alternative sources of funding to business. It's a slow process, but it's got to happen. I argue for a liberal approach because it's good for the economy, and particularly we need large numbers of highly specialised staff, many of them from outside the European Union. Business telling me the whole time they need, say, a specialist Indian engineer. It's disruptive if they can't get visas. We need people to come to this country as visitors. The regime has got to be friendly in that sense. It currently is quite bureaucratic. And I've also argued in government that we need to have a much more welcoming approach to overseas students who help finance our universities. So those are areas where I argue for a sensible, liberal approach to immigration. People do need to feel that the immigration system is under control, that we don't have large numbers of people overstaying and breaking the rules, we don't have lots of people abusing the benefit system. Public do need reassurance and all those things. I accept that, and as part of the government I'm helping to deliver those.